If you have a C5 or a C6 Corvette with a manual transmission, perhaps the best thing you can do for either one of them, right behind changing the engine oil, is to exchange the clutch fluid. Here's why. Both the C5 and the C6 Corvettes use a hydraulic clutch system, which is not unusual, but what is unusual is that the slave cylinder, which is the component that actually engages and disengages the clutch, is located within the Corvette's torque tube. This makes it extremely difficult to bleed the fluid, and it makes it even more difficult to change the slave cylinder if there's a problem. Over time, the clutch fluid gets contaminated with little pieces of rubber from the seals, from clutch dust that gets past the seals in the slave cylinder, and even though the system is sealed, little by little, year after year, it does absorb some moisture from the outside air, and over time that can lead to corrosion. Sooner or later in these 10 and 20-year-old C5 and C6 Corvettes, if the clutch fluid is neglected, the clutch can start sticking. It's not uncommon for the clutch pedal to be stuck to the floor, and if this happens, component replacement is probably your only option. If you go take a peek at the clutch fluid in your C5 or C6 right now, most of you are going to find that it's kind of dark and old, like the fluid in this C6 Corvette I picked up a few months ago. And it should be rather clear and colorless, like this fresh fluid that I'm pouring into this glass. So if you find that your clutch fluid's a little bit dirty, the best time to service it is right now before you have any clutch issues. The good news is preventative clutch fluid maintenance is super easy and inexpensive and should take about 10 minutes or less. So let's go ahead and change ours right now. Step 1 is to cover your Corvette's paint near the clutch fluid reservoir. If you're not aware, clutch fluid and brake fluid are the same thing, and either one can damage your paint, so it only makes sense to cover up the areas that we'll be working around. Step 2, go ahead and remove the round clutch fluid reservoir cap and just set it off to the side. Next, go ahead and use a Mighty Vac or a clean turkey baster. There's even a tool made specifically for this purpose. I'll include a link in the description below. And go ahead and suck out all of the fluid from the reservoir. Then take a clean towel and clean out any remaining crud from inside the reservoir. Finally, go ahead and refill the reservoir with .4 brake fluid, but not all the way to the top, because that rubber bladder that's inside the cap has to have room to displace a little bit of the fluid when you tighten that down. Now, interestingly enough, the C5 owner's manual calls for .3 brake fluid in the clutch. The C6 owner's manual calls for .4 brake fluid in the clutch. They're essentially the same hydraulic systems. Since both fluids are compatible and .4 brake fluid withstands heat a little bit better, I use .4 in both cars, but it's up to you if you want to use .3 in your C5 or not. So now you have changed out the fluid in your clutch system reservoir, but you really haven't changed out any of the fluid that's 2.5 feet down lower in your slave cylinder. And unless somebody has added a remote speed bleeder to your C5's clutch system at some point in its history, this is the best you're going to be able to do, but it's absolutely worth doing. This is because over the coming days and weeks, every time you drive your Corvette, through heat cycling, where the hot fluid will rise and the cold fluid will sink, and the pumping action of the clutch and the slave cylinder, the fluid will mix between the reservoir and the slave cylinder. So definitely keep an eye on your clutch fluid going forward, and if it does become dirty, just go ahead and repeat this process. How quickly it becomes dirty is probably going to depend on how dirty your fluid was to start with, but if it does stay pretty clean, just repeat this process yearly, and that'll go a long way towards preventing any issues with your clutch.
And that is, the clutch has not been coming up off of the floor 100% while I'm driving.
All right, guys, so this video is going to be based on my clutch pedal sticking to the floor. I'm not coming back up.
Now, if you happen to be lucky and somewhere along the line your Corvette already has a speed bleeder installed, like the one I installed in the C5 when I did the clutch job, then you can easily change out all of your fluid from the slave cylinder all the way up to the reservoir. And for more information on how to do that, just click the link right up here.